Hey, it's Huck. And I apologize, I'm uploading this video again on my smartphone, still having computer issues. I wanted to talk today a little bit about, now it's been a few days since the Congressional Budget Office came out with their assessment of the repeal and replacement alternative to ObamaCare, what's been basically called TrumpCare. And, none of the findings should be a shocker. It's a pretty devastatingly bad plan all around. And even the very, very conservative guy that heads up the CBO had to admit as much. Personally, it's much worse than is even being reported in many respects. For instance, it takes about more than $200 billion out of Medicare, which is greatly going to accelerate, the Medicare funding shortfall. And, the other shoe that hasn't dropped quite yet is what Republicans tend to do with the Medicare program. And it's no secret. They pretty much let that be known for years that their intention is to privatize Medicare. But, what it amounts to is, boy, if you're a senior citizen, if you're anywhere in your 40s or older, between what they'd like to do with TrumpCare and what they intend to do to Medicare, not only are you going to not be able to afford insurance until you reach Medicare age of 65. I mean, you're just going to be priced out. But once you turn 65, you're going to also be screwed. Unlike today, where once you turn 65 and you can get on to, Medicare, Medicare is not perfect, but it has been a godsend for most folks. And I guess I want to take a step back in all of this. You can talk about the 14 million people that would lose their health care almost instantly under TrumpCare, or the 24 to 26 million people that are likely to lose it over time. You can talk about any number of aspects of TrumpCare and how it would, raise the cost of virtually everyone with health insurance, how it would, throw millions of people off of insurance. Kids, older folks, the very poor. So you can talk all you want about that, but I think it's time to finally address the bigger picture here. And it's something that I tried to address with the very first video I did about ObamaCare way back in 2010, where I kind of detailed the whole history of, how Republicans were trying to come up with a market-based, private insurance-based alternative to, some better way of covering people and their medical needs. Bottom line, Republicans right now have come up with what, by all accounts, is just a terrible, terrible alternative to Obamacare. And there's a reason for that. They have painted themselves into a corner. It turns out that if you want a market-based, private insurance-based alternative to accessible health care, Obamacare is the closest you're going to get to that. That's why it always was the Republican alternative to what Democrats wanted, which was the most cost-effective means of insuring people, which is a sort of Medicare for all. So, like I say, I want to back up just one moment and let's clarify this. Most countries, virtually all industrialized countries, have gone with as Bernie Sanders calls it, a Medicare for all, but basically a national health insurance plan. Something that, because it's government run, is just more efficient. Now, Republicans are going to argue that, that anything government touches is automatically going to be, waste taxpayer money, and that the free market, if you will, does a better job of holding down costs. That's just never been true with healthcare. The fact is there's not any country out there that still uses a private insurance-based system without great government control. And the vast majority of countries have ditched private insurance for the most part altogether, unless it to be something like how we use private insurance as a Medicare supplement, to basically give you a, something closer to a more like a, to improve some of the loose ends. The most cost-effective means of insuring people in this country has been Medicaid and Medicare. And here's why. When you go to a doctor and you have Medicaid, the government pays that doctor a set amount of money. If you go to that same doctor with a Medicare policy, the government pays the doctor a slightly, in most cases, a little bit more money. But if you go to that doctor with private insurance, there's really no private insurance company out there that has been able to reduce their costs as effectively as Medicare and Medicaid. And the reason is simple. There is power in numbers. There are something like 64 million elderly on Medicare. There's another like 9 million or more disabled folks that are on Medicare. That's a lot of customers. And that, that volume gets them great leverage when it comes to negotiating prices for medical services, treatments, drugs, or it should. Medicaid is even more cost-effective than Medicare in that the government pays a little bit less for these things. And that's why there are some doctors that will maybe take a Medicare patient, but they are reluctant to take a Medicaid patient. So what other countries have found is that this system works really well for a number of reasons. One, they're able to negotiate the lowest prices, lower in most cases than any insurance company could. The other reason that it works is because you've eliminated profit from the whole healthcare equation. Currently, the amount of administrative cost and overhead to run a program like Medicare runs at around 3% of the revenue that's taken in. Private insurance companies, the amount of profit, administration, and overhead costs are closer to around 21%. So any idiot can see that even if you were to eliminate all the fraud, waste, and abuse you could possibly find, you're still going to be well below, dollar for dollar, the kind of access to health care for lesser money by using the state-run system, simply because they can put caps on the prices better than private insurance companies can do. They just have that buying power to do so. So years ago, as my first video back in 2010 tried to illustrate, years ago, it became quite apparent by the late 70s, 1980s, certainly by the early 90s in the Clinton administration, that healthcare costs have just risen dramatically. One of the problems this country made a long time ago, I guess, in retrospect, was that businesses began offering their employees the benefit of having health care coverage as a perk, as a benefit of being employed by their company. And unfortunately, this later came to be a real burden on businesses as those healthcare costs and the cost of buying healthcare coverage to cover those costs began escalating. And so what you found were more and more companies either getting rid of that benefit altogether or passing more and more of that cost on to the employee. ObamaCare penalizes businesses, at least those businesses that employ 50 or more folks. In other words, one of the provisions of Obamacare was, okay, if you want to have a, employer-based insurance program in this country, then we've got to make more employers live up to their obligation. And so what Obamacare did was basically it laid out a penalty, something like $2,000 per employee. If you are a company and you employ more than 50 people, you either cover those people with insurance, give them some options for health insurance, or we're going to assess you a fine per employee that you don't cover. In addition, there's a law that's been on the books for some time that is kind of an incentive for businesses to offer their employees health care coverage. And that law basically stipulates that if you are a business, you can't get your executives health insurance coverage, company paid health insurance coverage, unless you also offer it to the rank and file employee. So there's that. And what we have found increasingly is that even jobs that used to give really Cadillac care to their employees are passing more and more of the burden on to the employee, either with policies that have very high deductibles or have very high copays, or passing part of the premium costs on to them in bigger and bigger chunks. And so one of the things that Obamacare probably doesn't address quite as well as it should is, those added costs to people that are getting their insurance through their employer. It is a burden. It's a burden both to businesses and to the employees themselves in many cases. You've got a lot of folks out there that are making $9 or $10 an hour, for instance, or $12 an hour. And they've got a health care plan, but it's costing them maybe $200 or more a month to cover themselves. And that's if they're single and young, or maybe as much as, $400 or $500 a month if they're older or have kids. So you almost can't blame some folks for saying, you know what, I'm not going to take it. I can't afford that much out of my paycheck and still pay the bills. I'll have to take my chances. So one of the things that Obamacare probably fell a little short of was, holding down costs and taking steps to make sure that folks aren't overburdened with their costs, even if they get it from a private insurer. So the thing is, there have always been some fixes available, and many have been proposed by Democrats in Congress. Unfortunately, they don't hold any power, and they can't get any cooperation whatsoever. Not a single Republican is willing to fix the things that are fixable in Obamacare. Things like expanding a number of people that might be eligible for subsidy help if you buy insurance on the exchanges. Things like maybe giving a tax credit to businesses to help lower the cost of meeting the requirement of covering their employees with health insurance. Those two things alone would go a long way to getting more people to buy into the insurance market. And that alone would help bring costs down as the pool becomes, absorbs more and more young, healthy people bringing the overall cost and risk down. Well, at any rate, those are pretty easy fixes, and to be honest with you, doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot of additional revenue brought in. Some of this can be done simply by making a few adjustments to the revenue that's already there. And by doing a better job of dictating to healthcare providers just how much money, the government is willing to pay through these policies. And of course, Republicans don't like anything like government telling businesses how much they can charge. So that's the other problem. What we're left with now is a TrumpCare policy that is dead on arrival. It's doomed. It's doomed because on the one hand, you've got the most hardline conservatives, which the GOP is largely becoming overall, but I'm specifically talking about these members who call themselves the Freedom Caucus. These are the Tea Partiers. Last year's Congress, we called them the Tea Party Caucus. I don't know, they changed their name. But these are the real hardcore, real conservatives like Ted Cruz, like Rand Paul to a certain extent, believe it or not, at least on these kind of budget issues. And like, what's his name down in Alabama, Mo Brooks. These guys, Tom Price, Tom McElvaney, the new Office of Budget and Management, OBM, was a former representative that was a member of this. And really, these members feel that TrumpCare isn't cruel enough. It doesn't it still throws too much money, at people on Medicaid. It still gives too much, assistance. These lousy $2,000 to $4,000 tax credits that aren't going to result in anything except millions of people still not being able to afford health insurance even with the tax credit. Anyway, they feel it's way too generous. And then on the other hand, you've got what passes for today's more moderate Republicans, but basically they're not moderate. They're just realistic enough to realize that if you start throwing, tens of thousands of people in their district off their health insurance and raise the rates and the costs and the deductibles and the copays of everybody else, you're not going to get reelected if you vote for this. So they're against it. And any modifications to TrumpCare, either way, whether you make it a little bit more generous to help out a few more people, or you make it a little more draconian so that you cut those benefits to appease the hardliners, either way, you're going to only lose more votes, one in one direction or the other. They are beginning to discover that America is catching on. That while they were the opposition party and they had a Democrat in the White House and they could call for how, free market solutions and, reducing the tax burden sounds good. Once you begin implementing those kind of policies and voters actually have a chance to assess what you're talking about and how it affects them, suddenly it becomes crystal clear that these people are flat out evil. That's all there is to it. They're evil. The result of their policies are that people will die in large numbers and in a very cruel way. And the worst part about it is it was also unnecessary. Republicans, rather than embracing Obamacare as for what it was a free market insurance, private insurance-based alternative to the most cost-effective system of dispensing health care, coverage, which would have been like a Medicare for all coverage, instead of embracing it as the best compromise, beholden to their free market principles. Instead, they demonized it, which has left them with very few options. So I don't feel sorry for them at all. At any rate, that's where we are. I don't anticipate that this policy is going to go forward in any way that's going to help Republicans in the long run. If they manage to get anything through, no matter what improvements they may make to this plan, I think they're going to have a very tough time on their hands trying to convince voters the next time around in the 2018 elections that they deserve to be reelected. And many of them are going to lose their seats in Congress, and they know it. A lot of them know it. There's even been some talk that there are whispers in the Trump administration that there are some people close to Trump who have kind of, whether it be Steve Bannon or Roger Stone or others, who are basically trying to tell Trump, look, this is a hill you don't want to plant your flag and do battle on. This is a loser. And in those, if those rumors are true, they're actually trying to tell Trump that, look, what you really want to do, or what we may have to do, is we might down the road have to work with Democrats and, somehow sell it as a repeal of Obamacare. But in essence, what it would be is strengthening Obamacare and fixing the problems that are there. I, for one, don't put a whole lot of stock in that's the way things will go, simply because, Trump will not settle for anything that doesn't first repeal Obamacare, simply as a matter of ego. And so it'll be interesting to see what does happen. But again, lives are at stake here. This is no game. This is only the beginning. Once the full budget becomes apparent and more is, more Americans begin to see the ultimate priorities of the Republican Party, it's going to become more crystal clear, even to many Trump voters, that this is only going to harm them in many ways. What little insight we've seen into the some of the budget details that have been released, the fact that they're willing to throw seniors that are getting Meals on Wheels, we're talking about basically a $3 million stipend that the federal government assists through community block grants to the Meals on Wheels program. These are, the GOP is trying to cut that, along with some of these after-school programs that feed kids and basically serve as a after-school babysitting service, if you will, for working moms. These may seem like small, unimportant programs to these anti-taxers in the Republican Party, but the truth is these have real life consequences, real budget consequences for low-income working families in this country. And so I think finally now that Republicans have got, all the branches of government in their hands, and they've actually got to make good on their promises that, all these anti-tax, pro-market solutions are actually going to benefit people. It doesn't it doesn't work out that way, and people are beginning to see it. Anyway, I would love to hear your comments on this. I've got a lot more to say on this, but I think I'll leave it at that. I've talked long enough. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I promise to try to get back to you as quickly as I can. Have a great day. See if I can shut this off.